Hello and welcome to this episode of That's Interesting. I'm your host, Frank Hart. This show explores things that I find interesting. I hope that you find them interesting too. The guest on this episode is Wayne G. Miller. Wayne is here to talk about his book, Birdmen Over Boston Harbor. Welcome to the show, Wayne. It's good to have you
Frank.
here. Yeah.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, I was fascinated when I found out about your book. I didn't know anything about this aeronautical event in 1910 in Quincy.
Yeah, I think most people don't know
Right.
that some of the most famous aviators of all time were here at the infancy of aviation. So
Yeah.
it was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
When I found out about it was about 15 years ago when I joined the Quincy Historical Society.
Okay.
I had never heard of it, and I grew up in Quincy.
Yeah. Yeah. So so that's how you heard about it. Is that how you got decided to write the book, or?
Well, after I retired 15 years ago, I wanted to have something to do,
Yeah.
occupy my time. I started collecting old postcards, 120-year-old postcards of Quincy.
Yeah.
And I found out about the Quincy Historical Society, and I went there and met Ed Fitzgerald, who was the executive director, and
Yeah.
I joined shortly thereafter. And next thing I know, all these years later, I've written 3 books, and
Yeah.
I volunteer at the society. I write the newsletter for the Quincy Historical, and it's been kind of a dream job for me. I
good.
just love American history, and especially Quincy's history.
Good. So we want to talk about the state of aviation at this time. Is, if people remember the Wright brothers, I had to Google this to get the date myself. It was 1903, December 17th, 1903,
That's
I believe.
right.
And so this event, they started to plan it, the Harvard Aeronautical Society started to plan it in 1909. The event was in 1910. So what was aviation like at that time?
Well, in 1903, when the Wright brothers flew, they flew for 120 feet in the first flight, and the plane could only go about 10 feet above the ground, and it could only fly in a straight line. So it took about 4.5 years of experimentation and invention for airplanes to actually fly in a circle.
Oh.
You know, have lateral control where they could bank to the left, bank to the right.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until July of 1908 that Glenn Curtiss, who's a very famous aviator, made his first public flight. And a month later, the Wright brothers, Orville Wright, went to France for his first public flight. So we're talking about almost 5 years before anybody really saw an airplane fly.
Wow.
So they certainly knew about airplanes, the public, because there were magazine articles written and newspaper stories about it. They've seen pictures of airplanes, but nobody had really seen an airplane fly. They didn't know what the sound of the engine felt like, and the vibrations, and how high they could go, how big they were. You know, like the Wright brothers airplane was 41 feet wingspan. It was big. It was a big airplane. So the state of aviation in 1910 was still very primitive.
Right.
You know, they flew airplanes that had 1 seat or 2 seats. Sometimes there'd be a seat behind the pilot, and it was open air. There was no seat belts.
Right.
No real cockpit other than a seat. So it was an extremely dangerous business.
Right.
Aviators in the first few years were dying left and right. The airplane engines would cut off. They'd be a couple hundred feet up in the air, and all of a sudden there's no engine. And they'd be crushed by the airplane when it crashed. So by 1912, there were already 200 people who were killed in airplane accidents. And it was pilots taking chances, doing tricks. And, so the state of aviation, when the Air Meet was in Quincy, it was almost like a hysteria. Nobody had seen an airplane fly. So when the Harvard Aeronautical Society was formed in 1909, which was 10 months before the event. The people were prepared to come out and see these airplanes, and the Boston Globe estimated that 1 million people came either to Aviation Field to see it and paid the admission to get in, or they went to the beaches at Wollaston Beach or South Boston, Dorchester, Howe's Neck, just because they had a line of sight to see Squantum. It was a great location for people to get a free ticket, if you will.
Yeah. So Harvard Aeronautical Society must have worked pretty hard to pull this whole event together in 10 months.
Nobody had ever run an aviation meet on the East Coast before. So it was a big deal.
Was this the first one in the U.S.?
No, the first one was in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, if I could go back in time, the first aviation meets were actually held in France.
Okay, yeah.
In 1909, France was actually the center of worldwide aviation. They had surpassed the United States.
Yeah.
France had about 20 aviators in 1909, 1910. The United States only had 4. Wilbur Wright, Orville Wright, Glenn Curtiss, and Charles Willard, who was Glenn Curtiss's first student. So we had 4 aviators at the end of 1909. And France had 6 or more companies who were building airplanes. The United States only had 2. It was Glenn Curtiss and the Wright brothers. So the first aviation meet in the United States of any size, there were exhibitions in some cities, towns, but a real aviation meet where there were contests where people were contesting to win prizes was in January 1910. It was in Los Angeles. And they drew huge crowds. And so Harvard, a couple of months before that, formed the Harvard Aeronautical Society, and their goal was to run an aviation meet in Boston, which would be the first one on the East Coast. And they built an airplane, a biplane called Harvard 1. They built a glider, and they set up a library at Harvard University. It was the first university to study the science of aviation.
Okay. Yep.
And they started the society with 250 charter members, and you had to be an alumnus of Harvard or a current student, a professor, or an administrator at Harvard. Yep. So that's how it started in November of '09. So they knew they had a number of months to get this thing going.
Right.
And Abbott Roch, the man who founded the observatory, the Blue Hill Observatory, became the first president. And he had written a book about aviation. So he was the first president. And Adams Claflin, who was an alumnus of Harvard in 1886, he was a businessman in Boston. He ran the meet. He was in charge of putting the whole thing together and running the meet. And James V. Martin, who was a student at Harvard, became the manager of the Harvard Aeronautical Society. And he was charged with going around the country and even England to find the best aviators to come to Boston. Okay. So he went to Dayton, Ohio to meet with the Wright brothers to convince them, and they were guaranteed $30,000 to come to Boston, which is $1 million in today's money. It was an enormous sum of money. Glenn Curtiss agreed to come for a guarantee of $10,000, and Martin also traveled by boat to England to meet with Claude Graham White and A.V. Rowe, the 2 big names in England at the time, to convince them to come. And they came to America with a $7,500 guarantee each to come. So it was a huge effort to put this together.
Yeah. I think I read in your book that they had a funding of like $100,000 to put this event on.
Adams Claflin, who knew everybody in town. So he put the strong arm on his friends, and they donated about $100,000 for the prize money so
Yeah.
that Harvard could put on this event.
Yeah. So after looking at several other locations, they finally just decided on the Atlantic section of Quincy, which is now
Yeah,
in Squantum.
originally they wanted to run it in Salem, New Hampshire, which was kind of absurd.
Yeah.
The Aero Club of America, which was the sanctioning body of aviation back then, rejected it. They said, no, if we're going to sanction this meet, we want it in the Boston area.
Okay.
And the
Yeah.
second site they chose 2 months later was where Harvard Stadium is in Allston.
Yeah.
And that was 250 acres. And they decided after working on the diagrams and everything where they were going to put the garages for the airplanes and the runway and the grandstands. They had a 20,000 seat grandstand was the main
Right.
grandstand. All this wouldn't fit. So
Yep.
they were 2 months out from, they'd already advertised the date, September 3,
Yep.
and they were without a site. It was crazy. So 4 weeks before the meet was to start, they found the site at Squantum, which was owned by the New Haven Railroad,
Okay. Yeah.
and they were able to lease the site for 5 years. They took a 5-year lease to run this, and it was on the western side of Squantum, 500 acres, so it had plenty of room.
Yep. So in this month or so that they had left, they had to get the runways built, all the grandstands built.
They had to grade the field, first of all. They were lucky there were hardly any trees there. It was marshland.
Okay. Yeah.
Still is mostly.
Right.
That's where Squantum Point Park is in the northwest corner. That was the only area they did not use. The area of where Marina Bay is today was where the parking area was for 1,000 automobiles and carriages.
Yep.
The garages for all the airplanes were just to the left of that. Beneath that was where the runway was 1,000 foot long. They had the main grandstand just below the runway, and there was a western grandstand, which was on the Neponset River side, and there was one other grandstand. Then they had concession areas behind the grandstands.
Yep.
Where they had the concessionaires selling food, and they had the official photographer of the meet was there. Aram Kazanjian was his name, and he sold his photographs and postcards. One of the reasons why I wanted to write this book was because there's about, I believe, 40 to 50 postcards from the meet. He would take candid photographs of the aviators and the airplanes and in the air, and he would sell these at the meet. Some of them are quite rare. He produced very small quantities. So I've been collecting these for 15 years.
Yep.
And I have about 30 in my collection. So I wanted to put these in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So now they've built the field, and they had a course on the field, as I understand from your book, with pylons and
Yeah, they had a course, a race course,
Yeah.
with 6 pylons. It's a little building. It's about 20 feet high. It looks like a lighthouse.
Okay. Yeah.
And at the base of it, there would be a couple of men, and one of them would record whether the airplane went around the pylon. So the course was just under 2 miles around. It was at the northern end of Squantum. And so the 6 pylons were, like a quarter mile or 3/8 of a mile apart, all the way around.
Yep.
And so one of the scorers would judge whether who the pilot was, because all the airplanes had a number on the tail. So he would judge who the pilot was,
Yep.
and then the other scorer would judge whether he went around the pylon, which would have been a legal
Yep.
maneuver.
Yeah.
And so they had to have at least 2 men at every pylon.
How many pylons did they have?
6.
6. Okay.
So that was one thing they had to do.
Yeah.
Of course, they had to grade the field
Yep.
All the humps and bumps where the runway was had to be
Right.
taken out to a good extent.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't paved, it was just
dirt runway.
it was a dirt and grass runway,
Yeah.
which a lot of those barnstorming pilots used back then.
Right.
And they had to build the grandstands. They had less than 4 weeks to do all of this. They had all the wood and everything for the grandstands because they were planning on doing it in Boston.
Right.
So they had all this stuff, but they had to transport it to Squantum.
Yep.
They had to have construction crews to build it all. It was a massive undertaking. But they got it done. It started on September 3.
Yeah.
And the first ad they took was August 7th
Okay.
for the Quincy
Yeah.
facility. So they got it done in like 27 days or something.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah, it's amazing.
They worked hard.
Really.
Yeah. So.
And the city of Quincy also had to, they had to fix the roads there. They weren't wide enough for all the traffic. And there were crazy traffic jams on Wollaston Beach and, the Ponset area where the Ponset Bridge is.
Yep.
Hundreds and hundreds of cars. And the people would park on the Quincy Shore Drive, which was called the Boulevard back then.
Right. Yeah.
And they'd be parked on both sides of the road. You could hardly get by from all the cars that were parked. And there'd be thousands of people on the beach waiting to see the airplanes fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we have the building all the building is done, and now the pilots have to get their planes there. Mhm. So how did the pilots get their planes to Quincy?
Yeah, well, they basically folded them up and put them on trucks. So what they do is they break them apart completely.
Yeah.
So like the Wright brothers planes, 41 feet wingspan. So they would take the cotton muslin off of the wings.
Yeah.
They would fold them up. They would break down the struts and the spars. The longer pieces might have been 8 feet long, and then you have the smaller pieces. So they would break all those down, all the screws and nails and nuts. They would break those down too, and it would take about 6 to 8 hours to put the plane back together again with more than one mechanic. Back then, the mechanics were called mechanicians.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the airplane was called an aeroplane, Aeroplane. It wasn't until 1916 or so that Americans started calling it an airplane like we spell it today.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it took almost a man day to put the plane. So the pilots came the day or two before the meet started to put their airplanes together.
Yeah.
And Claude Graham White and A.V. Rowe came from England, so they put their planes on steamers. So they came on a steamer from England, and they were broken down completely. And when they came, they then had to be transported from Boston, where the steamer landed, to Quincy, and so it had to be put on another smaller boat to get to Quincy, and it sat there for almost a day before people could unload it. So they were like panicked that they couldn't put this thing together until it was taken off the smaller boat to put it together.
Yeah.
But they did it, and Claude Graham White actually was the first to fly the night before the meet started. So he christened the field. So they put his plane together in less than 8 hours. He came with 2 planes, actually.
Okay.
Both men came from England with 2 airplanes. So there were 4 airplanes that had to be put together.
Yeah. So how many pilots actually competed in the event?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things. The program from the event has about 25 pilots listed. They all have a name and a number associated with the plane. That's why I said the tail of the plane had a number on it. So all these pilots are identified. So there were 25 people in the program, but only about a dozen showed up. So through the years, there's been a lot of misinformation about the meet because people who have written stories about it talks about the 25 pilots that came to Boston to fly in the meet. Well, 25 pilots didn't show up, but fortunately, the big names did.
Well, that's good.
Wilbur
Yeah.
Wright was there, and Glenn Curtis, and Claude Graham White, and
Yeah.
a few others. But about a dozen flew over the course of the 2 weeks.
Yeah. So they had a bunch of events that they competed in. Like, you give some examples of what those events were? Like?
Yeah, well, the speed contest was one of the most exciting in the early days of aviation. Glenn Curtis, he was the fastest man on earth was his nickname. He got that from being a motorcycle rider. He set a record of 136 miles per hour riding on a motorcycle in 1907. And he became a pilot and a manufacturer of airplanes right about that time, 1907, 1908. And so he was really famous when he came here. Wilbur Wright came with his 2 best aviators, Walter Brookins, who was 21 years old. He was the Wright brothers' first student, and he knew the Wright brothers all his life. He grew up in Dayton.
Okay.
And Catherine Wright, who was the Wright brothers' sister, was Brookins' teacher in school. So there was a long association between the Wright brothers and Brookins. And the other pilot that came was Ralph Johnstone, who was a trick bicyclist before he got interested in aviation. And he flew in, he participated in carnivals where he did trick bicycling. And then he was trained by Brookins in Dayton to become one of the team that came to the aviation meets for the Wright brothers. And I mentioned Claude Graham White and Elliott Verdon Rowe, known as A.V. Rowe. The most famous amateur in the country came. That was Harmon out of New York. Augustus Post, who was the founder of the Automobile Association of America in 1902.
Okay. Yeah.
And he also was one of the founders of the Aero Club of America in 1905. So he came. He became a very famous writer about aviation and aeronautics.
Yeah.
So he was there. Charles Willard, who had appeared in Los Angeles, he came to Quincy, but he was a local boy originally from Melrose. There's a few other guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the other events that I found interesting that you talked about was the battleship bombing events. They would throw bags out of the plane.
Well, what's interesting is World War I was only 4 years away, and of course nobody could possibly know that.
Right.
But at this air meet, there were dozens of Navy men. There was no Air Force back then, but there were Army and Navy men, not only from the United States, but internationally, that came to see the airplanes because they knew instantaneously the power that the airplane could have in the next war.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they came to study the airplanes to see, what they were all about. And one of the most exciting events, probably the second most exciting event, was the bomb dropping contest, where they had these plaster of Paris bombs that were about the size of a softball.
Okay.
And they look kind of like a softball, actually. We have one at the Historical Society.
Yeah.
It's on display. And they would go up in the airplane, the pilot, and a couple hundred feet, up to as high as 500 feet, and they would drop a bomb, one of these plaster of Paris bombs, on a fake battleship that was there, and they came really close. And matter of fact, a few of them went down the funnel, the smokestack, and the crowd went crazy. They absolutely loved it. Of course, the the Navy guys, the admirals that were there were aghast.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of quotes in the Boston papers about how fearful they were of what that could do to an American battleship.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would destroy it.
Right.
And so that was one of the most exciting events besides the speed contest, which was 3 laps around the course.
Yep.
It ended up being 5.25 miles. And the winning time was 6.5 minutes each day. And so that translated to something like 52 miles per hour, which is really zipping around the course. And when they came around from the Neponset Riverside, they'd go right over the western grandstand and then over the main grandstand. And they weren't too high above the grandstand. It was pretty exciting and dangerous too.
I imagine that being the first time you ever saw a plane fly also, yeah.
And to be that close to them.
Yeah. Must have been
very exciting. So those are 2 of the exciting contests. Another one was the highest above the ground, the altitude contest.
Yeah.
Recently, the record was established at 6,175 feet, which is the first time a mile had been broken.
Yeah.
And so in Quincy, they were trying for the altitude contest, and then there was the distance contest, which is staged around the pylons. So the pilot would go around and around and around for hours.
Yeah.
And the winning time was over 3 hours and 101 miles, which was the equivalent of flying to Providence and back.
Oh, okay.
So it was quite a feat actually in 1910, because the engines were prone to cut out.
Yep.
And you'd have to land wherever you could land. Of course, back then, once you get out of the major cities, it wasn't a problem landing because there weren't suburbs like we know them today, with a lot of housing development. So that was another popular event. The marquee event of the meet was the $10,000 Boston Globe Prize, which was offered by Charles H. Taylor, who was the publisher of the Boston Globe, for the flight to Boston Light, which is at Little Brewster Island. It's about 7 miles from Squantum, a little more than 7 miles. So the flight was from the airfield at Squantum to Boston Light. You had to go around the light and come back to the airfield and fly again to the light and come back. So it ended up being 33 miles. Over water, no bailout option, because you've got these islands there. There's a couple of islands you could try to land on, like Peddocks Island and Long Island, but a lot of them are pretty small with trees and stuff. So it was a pretty scary event, actually.
Yeah.
A lot of the pilots did not want to make the flight because they were afraid that the engine might cut out or something else might go wrong. A gust of wind could knock these planes out of the sky. So there was at least one effort to fly to Boston Light.
Yep.
So that was pretty exciting. The place went crazy when it happened.
Yeah,
the times that it happened.
So the event was a week long?
Well, it started off being September 3 through the 13th.
Okay.
But it was extended 2 days because everybody was so excited about it. They thought we should do another couple of days. So most of the aviators stayed for the additional days.
Good.
And then after that, there was another event that was staged there the Saturday after it ended. So yeah, basically 2 weeks. The whole thing was about a 2-week extravaganza.
Wow.
Where 1 million people saw the airplanes fly.
It must have been something to see the boulevard with all those cars and people on it, and just people all over the beaches.
Can't imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't there to swim. They were They were there to see the airplanes fly.
You were telling me a little bit before that some of the people would get off at the train station, and then they'd walk.
The train station back. They would come from South Station to not Squantum, they would actually land in where Sagamore Street meets Hancock Street. That was where the Atlantic station was back then. And then you'd have to walk to Squantum, which was about a 20-minute walk. Or you could take a 5-cent trolley.
Yeah.
So you'd have to decide if you had enough money to spend another nickel. The admission to get in to aviation field was about $1.
Okay.
Which is $33 in today's money. $1 was a lot of money in 1910.
Yeah.
So a lot of people might take the train, which cost 11 cents from South Station, and then they would walk to near the field or the beach
Right.
and just camp out for free and watch the airplanes. Of course, you miss a lot, though, if you're not at the field. The aviators were all gathered near the runway. And the garages, you could actually walk up to the garages and see the airplanes. You could talk to the aviators.
Wow.
Get autographs. So it was worth $1 to get into the field.
Yeah.
But a lot of people didn't have $1.
True. True. Yeah, it sounds like it was a fascinating event and really enjoyed by the public.
Oh yeah, it was crazy. It was the first time people in New England saw an airplane fly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's about all I have that I was going to talk with you about, Wayne. Do you have anything else you want to add, or?
Well, the book is available at the Quincy Historical.
You want to show the book?
Oh yeah, the book.
Hold the book up to the camera and
here's the book.
Tell them where you can get it.
Very proud of it. It's published by the Quincy Historical Society, so they've sanctioned the book, and it's available there for $21.99. And it's a day-by-day account of what happened at the meet.
Yep.
So, and the aftermath. And there's a whole chapter at the end of the book about what happened to the aviators, which I found most interesting because there were some crazy things that happened to a lot of these men after they left Quincy.
Yep.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And people were interested in buying the book.
I would recommend it. I skimmed through it and I gave 3 pages of typed notes just on everything that was going on. There's a lot of information in there that I think people would really enjoy reading.
Well, thank you.
So,
I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed doing the interview. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, okay, so we're at the end of this episode, and I want to thank my guest, Wayne G. Miller, for coming and talking with us about the Birdmen over Boston Harbor. And I hope everybody enjoys this episode, and hope you stay interested. Thanks again, Wayne.
Thanks, Frank.